In this video, we're going to look at different ways of passing parameters into our subroutines. Now, we won't make any distinction between a subroutine and a function. We will just assume that we can use both of those terms interchangeably. Generally speaking, a subroutine will receive parameters but not necessarily pass parameters back out, whereas a function can receive parameters in and pass parameters out. But for this video, I will use the term subroutine, but I will use it interchangeably, and we will also look at functions as well. So we have already seen a method of passing parameters into our subroutine when we looked at the get character and print character routines in a previous video. So I have a couple of programs here which we've seen in a couple of videos ago. Now the one on the right hand side is the get character subroutine. So in this instance here, we type a character in or characters into the keyboard. We get the characters from the keyboard and then we place them in consecutive memory locations. And we use this get character subroutine. Now the get character subroutine is on the left hand side here. And we generated the machine code for this and we saved it in the ROM so that we can run through this program here. When it gets to the jump to subroutine, it goes to the ROM and it runs through the subroutine to get the characters from the keyboard and put them into memory, which is this piece of code here. And once it's finished, it will return control back to the main calling program here and it will just end. So as I say, we've seen this in a previous video. Now the get character subroutine required two parameters. One of them is the number of characters. So that's here on the right hand side, it says numchar. And it also required the starting position of the very first character. So we need to know the number of characters and we need to know the first position where we want to save that ASCII value for that character in memory. So those are the two parameters we must pass into this subroutine. Now we did this in this example by putting the number of characters in register R1 and putting the memory location of the first character in the index register. So we had to ensure that the actual values for those two numbers are held in registers. Now whenever we run through the get character, we then ensured that whenever we wrote this code, that this piece of code knows where to get the number of characters and it knows where to get the memory location of the first character. It knows that there are in register R1 and the index register. So that's how we were able to pass those values, by ensuring that the subroutine knows where to get them and us preloading them there for the subroutine before it actually runs. Now this is called passing a parameter by value, because we are actually passing the value which is required by the subroutine into that subroutine. But that's not the only way of passing parameters. We can also pass parameters by reference, and we can also pass parameters using the stack and the push and pop commands. And those other two methods, the by reference and by using the stack, are what we're going to look at in this video. Now, in order for us to proceed with this and also to add in an extra couple of ideas about global and local variables, I have written another piece of code So it's going to be really quite straightforward. And all we're going to do is we're going to have two numbers. So one of the numbers is in register R0, the other number is in register R1. And this piece of code here is going to return the largest of these two numbers and put it into register R2. So in effect, this here is actually looking more like, say, a function than a subroutine. It's receiving two parameters, which are two numbers. It's working out which one is the largest, and then it's going to return a value which is the maximum, and it's going to save that value both in register R2 and it will save it in memory. So the program looks like this here. We've got our origin is 0x8000 as usual. We're going to have at the bottom here, I'll start off with the directives. We're going to have our first number that we're going to look at, which is just called first. We're going to have our second number, which is called second, and we can make these numbers whatever values we want to make them. Now, whenever we go through the subroutine, we're going to save these two numbers to memory locations. So the first memory location is going to be called save first, and it starts at the value 8100, and we're going to have a save second, which is going to save the second value here to this memory location 8101. And we're also going to have the maximum value, so the largest value between those two, and we're going to save this to memory location 8102. Now, the way the program works is we're going to take the first number and put it into register R0. So in this instance here, first number is going to be 5. So we put 5 in register R0, 7 in register R1, and then we jump to our subroutine. Now in this instance here, we're not placing the subroutine in the ROM, but if we wanted to, we could do that. But it doesn't help us at all here for understanding what we're doing here at the moment. It's just unnecessary. So we jump to subroutine biggest. So it's going to work out what is the biggest one. So first of all, what it's going to do is going to store the value of register R0 in the memory location save first. So it's going to take the number 5 and put it in this memory location. It's going to take number 7 and put it in this memory location. So now we can see the difference between a local variable and a global variable. So the global variable here in this instance is the information which is held in register R0 and R1. So this is going to be the value first and the value second. Now at the moment they're not really variables, we're just defining them down here at this point, but we can change this to any value we want and then we can run the code. So in that context they are actually variables. So these are the global variables which exist up at the top level of the code. Now we're going to pass these variables by value, as we've seen in the previous example, by putting the values into registers, and we pick them up from the registers here as well within the biggest subroutine. But now we're going to save those values to a couple of memory locations. So now the memory locations that are referred to within this subroutine are actually going to be our local variables. So we've taken the global variables and we've passed them into our subroutine, and the subroutine we've saved them into a separate memory location, and these are our local variables. So local variables are in fact save underscore first and save underscore second, and our global variables are first and second. Now we're going to clear the flag. Now we're just going to make the comparison between the registers R0 and R1. Now ideally what we want to do is make the comparison between the contents of the memory location save first and save second, but we don't have that functionality within the assembler. Okay, so we will still just make the comparison with the contents of register R0 and R1, because in this instance they're just the same thing. Now we're going to jump if A is bigger to the point A big. So this is A big here. So if the first number is bigger than the second number, then we load the first number into register R2, and then we jump to the return. So we get to the return here, it says return, and it goes back up to the jump to subroutine, but it goes back up at this point here, and then it will store the contents of register R2 in the memory location given by the max, which is the one down here, so which is 8102. Now the other option here is if the A is not bigger. So if A is not bigger, then it just continues and it knows then that B is bigger, and it will save second in R2, and it will jump to the return, and that's the return here, and it goes back up to this point here, and it will store the contents register R2 in the memory location max, and then it will jump to the end, and here's the end down here, and that's the end of the code. Now we do make the assumption that that one number we put in is bigger than the other. We're not going to put in two numbers that are equal. Okay, so it does assume we're choosing two numbers. So this shows us an idea of how we can think of global variables and local variables within a subroutine or a function, and it's useful for adding this in at this moment in time. So let's run this and we'll see it working. So we will run it up, and I've slowed it down a little bit so we can see what's happening. So we put number 5 here, number 7, and you can see it's taken the largest of the two, which is number 7, and it's placed it in register R2. Now we can see also, if we get into the memory allocations, we've got the local variables here stored in the memory location, the number 5 and the number 7, and also the value which we return from our, if we can call this a function, which we return from our function, which is the value max. So locally max is stored in this location here, but whenever we pass it out to the calling function, and we save the value in register R2. So that shows us how we pass the two variables, pass the, if you like, we can call them variables or parameters, into our subroutine or function, and we return a value from our function to the calling function. Now we can swap those numbers round about just to ensure that it does actually work. So we could change that so that this one now becomes 7, and we could make this one 5. We'll save that, and we'll need to run it up. So this is the code here, and we'll load this into the machine. So that's the new code here. And we'll run the simulation. So now I've put them round the other way round about in the other registers, and you can see it still come out with the largest value, which is the value of 7. And again, it will save the variables locally within the memory. So that's us gone over again the idea of passing a parameter into a subroutine or a function as a value. And in this instance here, we were able to look at the idea of a local variable and a global variable. And we were also able to see how the function returns the value out of the subroutine back to where it was called from. I think we've covered enough in this video. In the next video, we will look at passing parameters as a reference. Thank you for listening. I'll get you in the next video. Goodbye.